Okay, people are getting let in now. Welcome, guys, to our second installment of Electrification with the Experts. This is a webinar series we've put together with Toronto Hydro, and where we like to bring in expert speakers. And this topic we've gotten really excited about. It's radiators and heat pumps coming together. When we're out doing community events, we're hearing that this is a really big roadblock for a lot of people who are looking to reduce the fossil fuel use in their homes, make their homes more energy efficient. They're wondering if they're saddled with their gas boiler or if like modern efficient heat pumps can actually work with their systems or not. So we're going to find out all your options. We're going to get into the weeds here. But as we're just letting people filter in, you're going to see that a poll is going to pop up. This is just some questions we have about your home, what kind of heating and cooling and draftiness and any comfort problems that you're having there. And this is just because heat pumps can really change the status quo of your home. And we're also curious to understand if people are predominantly here for radiators or if we're actually having people join because they're interested in the topic. So that just helps us understand where you guys are coming from there. So we really appreciate anyone filling out the poll. And if you've gone through that already, definitely recommend introducing yourself in the chat, saying hello, and what interests you in heat pumps? Are you actively doing a renovation? Did you hear about it at a different event? Did your neighbor talk about it? Have you been seeing them around? We're very curious to hear about that. And if you mention the neighborhood you're calling in from as well, because we're Toronto based, so we love to hear where people are calling in from. And it's not one of the speakers tonight, but I have my colleague Jake in the chat, and he's going to be posting links and engaging with your questions as they come up. So just want to thank him for doing that service. And throughout this, we're going to have people posting questions in the chat, but really encourage you also to have questions ready for the end. As the speakers are going through, we're not going to weave questions in as they're presenting, but we're going to save them for the end there as well. So just for the latecomers here, welcome to the second installment of Electrification with the Experts. We're focused in on radiators and heat pumps here, and we're excited to have some expert speakers get into the weeds of the options that we have in Toronto. A lot of Toronto homes have radiators, and a lot of people in Toronto are interested to see what the new technology is, how can they improve the comfort of their home, how can they reduce their fossil fuel usage here. So we're excited to get into this topic and have this as a recording for other people to look at later, but we appreciate you being here live, guys. So definitely engage with the poll and put your questions into the chat there. All right, so I think we've let it go for a little bit here, so we'll start to move into the presentation. So we're going to start with a land acknowledgement, and I bring a little bit of a contemporary flavor to it as well. So we'll start with the kind of retrospective land acknowledgement, which is that we acknowledge the land we're meeting on as the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people as well. So we also acknowledge Toronto's covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So with that kind of historical perspective, I also like to bring in what issues are Indigenous people facing today in Toronto? What are those contemporary issues that we can actually engage with and put forward that spirit of reconciliation in our own context, in our own city right now? So, as we know, a couple of weeks ago, our government got their budget just squeaked it through, and they're on their nation building project right now. And one of the programs that is not getting renewed is the urban programming for Indigenous people. So these are all the different friendship centers. The Native Women's Center, the Native Center of Canada are not going to be getting the same level of funding that they're used to coming through 2026 and are looking at cutbacks and turning people away at a time of affordability challenges and a crisis and time of a housing crisis. So there's a lot of fear that the issues facing urban Indigenous people are only going to be exacerbated at a time when funding should be really increasing, not getting pulled back. So I pull out a little quotation here that is coming from the article. This is the government statement saying basically it's not expiring, we're moving the funding, there's going to be a different model, but CBC helpfully points out that the details of that model are not determined at this moment. So I think this is a really right moment to engage with your MPs and saying, hey, this is a program that's important for reconciliation. Nation building shouldn't leave out Indigenous nations. And having worked in an MP's office, I know that in-person visits and handwritten letters get looked at and they get answered. So it's a little more convenient to do the big campaigns and the petitions, but if you have the time to write the letter or visit your MP to talk about the urban program for Indigenous peoples being largely defunded, I think that would be a really meaningful step towards reconciliation here. All right. So we'll move into tonight's agenda. So we're going through those intros and housekeeping notes right now. And our first speaker is going to be Michael Atalick from Toronto Hydro. He's going to be taking that sort of the high level perspective. What is electrification? Why is it beneficial? Why should you be interested in it? As well as what are the pathways to that through for you? So Michael's going to be talking about the energy coaching program that they just launched. And Michael himself is an energy coach, so he has a lot to say about that. So I'm looking forward to that piece. Our second speaker is going to be Sarah Grant. She's from Goldfinch Energy. She's an energy advisor that engages with Torontonians, has worked with over 1,000 people on trying to get off fossil fuels in their homes. And she's going to get really into the weeds of your different options of pairing radiators with heat pumps, the costs, trade-offs, rebates, contractors, all those juicy conversations that we know are speed bumps. So Sarah's going to be getting into that. And then I'm Nathan. I'm with the Toronto Home Energy Network. I'm going to be closing the presentation with some words of advice from homeowners that have gone there. We're going to look at one project that went really well, someone pairing radiators and heat pumps, and they're very happy with it. And one project that hit a really big speed bump, and she wanted to share her words of advice for people that are going down her path as well, so they can avoid the same frustrations and costs that she encountered with her project. So we're very grateful to that person for sharing their experience with us. And we'll talk a little bit about the Toronto Home Energy Network's community support model and how we want to help people get to heat pumps in a slightly different way than Toronto Hydro and Sarah Grant engage with that question as well. So lots of ways for you to get support on this heat pump journey. Finally, the open Q&A at the end where you can ask your questions about your home and your context to our expert speakers and get those answered there. So that's always an exciting section. Again, post those questions in the chat as we're going, and Jake's going to be feeding those questions to me towards the end there. Of course, we're going to share a handout with links and the recording. We'll get it up tomorrow. We'll send it out to anyone who's RSVP to this. So there's no reason to feel like you need to write down everything we said. We're going to be sharing the slides. So feel free, sip some tea, relax, and enjoy the webinar tonight. So before I hand it over to Michael, just again, our speakers. Michael's the climate action consultant with Toronto Hydro, energy coach, and a conservation engineer. And we're really grateful that we have a forward-looking public utility who's willing to do the coaching and the education and really lean into the marketplace to make sure that electrification is stress-free and an understood path and a stress-free path for people. Sarah Grant again, co-founder of Goldfinch Energy and a certified energy advisor, and has worked with so many homeowners, really knows the ins and outs of Toronto homes and the particulars of that. And I'm going to close again. I'm Nathan, and Homeowner Journey Coordinator just means I'm trying to get you the right information and resources at the right time as you're going through your heat pump installation process. And we'll get a little bit more into what the Toronto Home Energy Network does a little later on in the presentation. So I'm going to stop my share here and pass it over to Michael to continue with his presentation so we can hear about what Toronto Hydro is up to.
Thank you, Nathan. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Looks like we maybe avoided some IT glitches. So it looks like you can see my screen, hear me okay?
Yeah.
Terrific. Okay, well, thank you for having me here this evening, and thank you for everybody online on your computer, on your phone that's elected to attend our heat pump conversation this evening. My name is Michael Atalick. I'm a climate action consultant at Toronto Hydro. In my role there, I essentially help homeowners, residential homeowners, with electrifying their homes and in support of decarbonizing and reducing emissions. So with that, I'm going to start with a little bit of a high-level review of kind of where we are and how we got to where we are. So as some of you probably already know, the city of Toronto has established a climate emergency, and they've established a goal of reaching net zero by 2040. And this is a really aggressive goal, and how the city is going to get there is important. So they've done that through a document from Transform TO, and this is essentially the strategy through which the city will reach net zero. Now, in this strategy, they have a breakdown of the citywide emissions, and this is what we're kind of showing here in the middle of the screen, this pie chart. And what the emissions inventory is showing us is that about 90% of the local emissions in the city of Toronto are being generated by buildings and transportation. So in support of this goal of reaching net zero, we need to attack and address these emissions that are coming from buildings and transportation. Um, so as part of this strategy, the city of Toronto actually reached out to Toronto Hydro and asked Toronto Hydro to develop a plan and establish a path forward to help actually achieving some measurable results. And Toronto Hydro responded with a plan, and in that plan there were a couple of elements that we've identified. One, that we're going to try and deliver significant greenhouse gas emissions. Two, that we're going to try and stimulate the local clean tech economy so that people can have service providers and contractors to do their projects, and also to advance social equity. Okay. So I'm going to drill down now a little bit more into those emissions that we talked about, the 90% of emissions in the city, but on a residential perspective. So residentially, emissions are being generated typically from the burning of fossil fuels. So the burning of fossil fuel for our transportation, typically our cars, our home heating, and our domestic hot water. So these are the three kind of large ticket items where we typically burn fossil fuels traditionally to get what we need out of those appliances. So how are we going to actually attack these appliances and reduce our emissions? So what we're proposing, or what the plan is proposing, is to tackle each one of these kind of segments of our home appliances individually. So we're talking about electrifying our home heating. So that's through the adoption of heat pumps. We're talking about electrifying our transportation, again, through the adoption of an electrical vehicle or another e-mobility device. And then thirdly, our domestic hot water. So this is, again, to replace our fossil fuel burning appliances with high efficiency electric alternatives like heat pump water heaters. Now, there are kind of some financial considerations when people are considering the switch to electric appliances, but some of the benefits that we typically talk about when we're talking about electrification. So I'm going to put the cost and benefit that part aside for a second, but I just want to talk about a couple of the other benefits. One of them is the increased comfort that homeowners typically experience when they electrify their homes. Typically, homeowners notice increased comfort, typically year-round, as a result of reduced temperature fluctuations in their home. Another element that we typically see is that as a result of eliminating the burning of fossil fuels, the air quality in and around the home is improved. And this is also a benefit to the local community as well, which is, again, something that we're striving to from Toronto Hydro, one of the things we're striving to engage people and organizations at a community level too. Um, and the other benefit in terms of heat pumps typically is that you can get two appliances in one. So a heat pump can typically do heating and cooling for your home. And provided that they are sized and installed properly, they can meet all of Torontonians' home heating needs and cooling needs in Ontario. So I'm going to jump back a little bit and just talk about climate advisory services for a second. So when Toronto Hydro established this plan to support the city and its goal to decarbonize and electrify, we established some climate advisory services to achieve those goals. And some of those goals are to make it faster and easier to adopt technologies, particularly energy efficient and electric technologies. As I mentioned before, too, to help clean tech companies grow, so to grow the industry that's supporting homeowners in their electrification projects, and also to support and enable projects themselves. So that's supporting the electrification of buildings, whether it be through a service connection or an upgrade, providing information and data, those types of things. Now, circling back on the services that we talked about, I wanted to just kind of review the current services being offered by Toronto Hydro for residential customers. So, like Nathan mentioned on the call earlier as well, is we recently launched, or the city recently launched a furnace upgrade program, which includes free energy coaching. So this is available to all Toronto residential customers, and it's essentially a free 60-minute call with a Toronto Hydro Energy Coach to review technology and answer your questions about decarbonizing or electrification. We also have a non-binding estimate process. This is for again, residential customers that are maybe looking to increase the size of their electrical service. There's a free non-binding process that you can use to get an idea of how much that service upgrade might cost and how long it might take. We're also working to provide information on clean technology solutions. So like these types of webinars and engagements, as well as developing case studies. And I'm going to talk about one in a minute, but we find that case studies are a great way to learn about technology and solutions. We've also made it easier for customers to access and download their historical data. And this can be an important tool along the electrification journey. I talked a little bit about the presence in the community. So another thing that Toronto Hydro does is attending community events like the City of Toronto's Community Environment Days. And again, this is an attempt and an effort to go and engage residents and just make them aware of technologies and alternatives to fossil fuel appliances. We've also established a clean tech network directory. So this is essentially a directory that homeowners can use online. They can search for contractors and consultants and service providers, and they can be confident that they have a level of knowledge and experience. And then as well as to deliver some training and build capacity again in the clean tech services network. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the energy coaching because we have a lot of residential customers that are interested in energy coaching. And the energy coaching is an opportunity to get some information from a trusted source like your local utility, and to learn about maybe energy efficient technologies that maybe you weren't previously aware of, or that maybe contractors or service providers aren't volunteering. So we like to use this as a forum to make you aware of those, and provide you with some tools to start your journey. We also use it as an opportunity to myth bust or address misinformation. So we still hear things out in the field that are incorrect or misrepresented. Energy coaching is also a great way to learn about kind of current incentives and financing opportunities, to get it connected with our clean tech directory, and then also to walk through historical data and your peak demand tool. So some of the, just at a high level, some of the kind of myths and misinformation that sometimes comes across in some of these energy coaching sessions are things like heat pumps don't work in Toronto winters. This used to be true decades in the past, but technology has improved drastically, and modern cold climate heat pumps, when sized and installed properly, can actually meet all of a home's heating and cooling needs. We also sometimes hear that the grid is not ready for electrification, when in fact, actually, what we're seeing is that electrification is going to be more determined by how fast people can adopt technologies as opposed to the grid being ready. And then the third is around electrical service upgrades. So sometimes as homeowners start down this journey, they might be getting advice or recommendations that they need to do a service upgrade. And then actually what we find is that most homes in the city can actually electrify on their existing service. So one of the other tools that I talked about was case studies. So this is an example of a case study that Toronto Hydro has published now. It's actually a local resident that's fully electric. So they no longer have a connection to the natural gas system. They have an air source heat pump, and in this case, it's actually an air to water heat pump. So again, for those air to water homeowners may be interested in looking at this. And these case studies we find are a great way to just learn about what homeowners have done, what the benefits have been, and maybe even what some of the challenges that they endured through their journey. Next, I just wanted to talk a little bit about historical data. So this is kind of showing here an example of what homeowners can now see on their Toronto Hydro portal. So this is a breakdown of hourly energy usage. So this is a great tool to understand how much power you're using and when. And you can actually download up to 24 months of data. And it kind of looks like this graph here. And this data can be downloaded in two formats. One is a green button version, and the other one is a CSV file, or a comma separated variable file, which is a file that's Excel readable. So if you're interested in kind of doing your own analysis or looking at your own data, I would suggest the CSV file approach. Green button, you need some special software to do. But if you're engaging a contractor or service provider, ask them about if they can read green button, and you can provide them with that data. The nice thing about looking at this hourly historical data is that we can use 1 hour's worth of data to do an amperage calculation. So this is kind of a methodology that's described by the ESA here, and what it's showing is how we convert a kilowatt hour number to an amperage value. And again, this is important information for homeowners to have, especially if they're having a conversation about upgrading their electrical service, because you can actually do a calculation which will demonstrate how much capacity you have on your service if you subtract this peak demand from your service rating. Okay. And again, this is information that's to support electrification. What we suggest to homeowners is have this information available to you when you're having your conversations with your HVAC contractor or your electrician. Next, I'm just going to quickly touch on our clean tech services directory. So again, a list of qualified contractors, service providers, and professionals. Whether you're looking maybe for somebody to do air sealing or auditing or heat pump installations, or even solar, this is a great resource to get connected with qualified local contractors. And lastly, here I've just got a kind of some examples of other things that Toronto Hydro does in the community, so trade shows and community environment days. And again, what we're trying to do is get messaging out there to empower homeowners so that when it comes time to replace their appliances, that they're making an informed decision that aligns with their goals and values. And that brings me to the end of my deck. So thank you very much.
Cool. Really appreciate it, Michael. With the energy coaching, are people taking calls and following up with emails regularly? Are people just normally taking calls? How's it working out so far?
So yeah, I mean the energy coaching has been it's been great. What we find though is that some people have been doing phone calls. We like to have the energy coaching sessions in front of a computer because we typically show information and data.
Yeah.
We find it's a better exchange that way. So if you're planning on doing an energy coaching session, just plan on being in front of a computer. Um, but also the energy coaching service is also not like a one and done type of a service. It's meant to be the start of the journey, so you can continue to reach out to Energy Coach or the climate action team at Toronto Hydro. We kind of use this similar analogy to other things, but this electrification or decarbonization is more like a marathon than a sprint. There's lots of things to learn, lots of things to consider, so it's always kind of an ongoing conversation.
Cool, that's great. You're preempting a little bit of my case study that went well there. So I'm happy to bring some of those thoughts up again later. That's awesome. Cool, thanks,
Great.
Michael. I'm gonna ask Sarah Grant now to unmute and then share her screen as well. So then Sarah can get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of air to water systems, what your options are. There's kind of two big main options, but I won't steal Sarah's thunder there. So we're excited to have you, Sarah. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
And as far as what you can you see the home, like the screen with the goldfinch at the
Yep.
top?
Looks clean.
Okay, amazing. Let's rock and roll. Okay, so yeah, I'm just gonna dive into talking about home. Probably why most of you are here is because you have a home with an older gas boiler, maybe, and radiators, maybe a combination, maybe some in-floor heating, maybe you have cooling with ductless somethings, ductless ACs, ductless heat pumps, maybe not. And so what I want to do is just share based on what I've seen over the last 5 years, kind of have emerged as what I think are kind of like two buckets of options. And then we'll dive a little deeper into what those two buckets are. And I can see on the webinar there are a number of awesome, well, everyone here is awesome, but the number of really amazing homeowners who have really led the way when it comes to getting their homes off that nasty fossil fuel we call natural gas. And so feel free at the end if we have time to chime in. You know who you are, folks who've got air to water heat pumps. I think I counted like 5 or 6 of you guys, so it's pretty awesome. So just before I dive in, so I'm Sarah. I run a company called Goldfinch Energy, and we're a team of energy advisors. And some of you may have had an energy audit. Typically, an energy audit is unfortunately a little bit too focused on sort of rebates or loans, and that may have been your experience. However, we're energy advisors that didn't get into the business to necessarily help you with rebates and loans, although we can. But our primary goal is to help folks electrify their homes, and so our audits go above and beyond what you might have experienced as a typical energy audit. We'll actually do a real blower door test, which I know sometimes doesn't happen, and the blower door test is a really neat way to figure out where the drafts are. And we'll use some thermal imaging to like actually help you see that. We'll give you a better idea of what's going on with your home, opportunities to make improvements. And when it comes to air to water, we'll help you work out options in a lot more detail, including figuring out kind of like what are the heating requirements of your home, the cooling requirements, what can those radiators put out? If they're cast iron, it's a little different than if they're modern. It's a little different than in floor. What does that mean for sort of switching to say an air to water? So I'm kind of jumping the gun a little bit. So just sorry, briefly, as far as Goldfinch Energy, we've been around for about 5 years now. We've worked with over 1,500 homes. This is actually last year's data, so it might be more like 2,000 now. And good chunk of them help them install heat pumps. Our experience, most of those numbers are air to air, but I would say probably around. Well, I looked at the data last night. It's about 6% are folks who have hydronic heating and have gone with the heat pump as well. Number of solar installs and number of homes that have been able to get off the gas entirely and give the middle finger to Enbridge. So 2 options for heating when it comes to folks with hydronics. So number 1, I would call full electric. And so I'm going to get into a little deeper in the next slides, but a full electric system means that you don't have any fossil fuels. You can get off gas entirely, and there are heat pumps that can extract heat from the outside air and transfer that to water, and then you have already sort of a water circulation system in your house, whether it's radiators or in-floor heating or both. And so these heat pumps are amazing, and they're very common in Europe. And the technology's come a long way. They'll work really well, even up to minus 30 degrees. And so definitely an option. The alternative would be similar to kind of, what we have with cars and what we have with folks who have ductwork is a hybrid option. So for various reasons, and I'll get into that, you may decide to sort of have both fuels, basically. So what this involves is you're still going to have your gas boiler, and the gas boiler can do the heating as the temperature starts to drop. Some of the homes I've worked in tends to be around sort of -5, -6. They find the gas boiler is needed. And until then, you end up with ductless heat pumps. So these are those wall-mounted things. They can give you heating and cooling. And they'll do, kind of your spring and your fall heating, but may not be able to kind of keep your house comfortable as it starts to get colder outside. So full electric and hybrid, I'm going to dive a bit deeper into those. But, generally I would say there are kind of a few things to think about if you're sitting here and you're wondering what to do in your home. And, a couple things would be, do you have cooling? Is that part of your plan? Is that part of your need? If your home is 100 plus years old, like most of our homes are in Toronto, what has been done to help the home do a better job of keeping the heat in? Meaning, is it drafty or not? Does it have insulation? Are these windows original, or they've been improved over time? And then what is your sort of distribution system? Is it cast iron radiators? Is it a mix of in-floor and cast iron? Is it newer radiators, the fin style? And those are kind of things that, I'll ask you to kind of like think about and just kind of like, oh, that's my home, as I go into these 2 options. So the first option, the full electric, involves air to water heat pumps, which the cost tends to be for sort of a pretty well designed, well installed system, anywhere between $30,000 and $40,000. There are likely, I would estimate, I don't know if Toronto Hydro, if you guys have this data, but from what I've seen, there are likely around 50 that have been installed in Toronto. As I mentioned before, very common in Europe. In Europe, most homes have a hydronic form of heating, and they are also more ahead of us in terms of climate action. And so there are a lot more air to water heat pumps. If you are a podcast listener, there are a lot of podcasts online that you can listen to about air to water heat pumps in Europe. So, that gives me hope. And when I tell people that, I think that gives other people hope that, we can do this here too. It's just, honestly, it's the status of the market that's keeping that cost a little bit high and keeping the number of homeowners also quite low. As far as manufacturers, two manufacturers in Canada that I know of anyway, Arctic Heat Pumps out in Manitoba and Hydrosol, and a few imported options as well that are well established. So Eden Energy, they're up in Guelph and Mitzair. I forget exactly where they are. They're in the GA somewhere. I think it's worth mentioning. I mean, there are other manufacturers that are likely trying to get into the space, which and this list has grown in the 5 years that we've been around, which is encouraging, right? It's a sign that manufacturers are starting to take note of where things are at and seeing this as a market opportunity. There are a small number of contractors who are familiar with installation, and anyone on this call who's got an air-to-water heat pump could feel free to share their contractors. And I think that, it's important to note that, installing an air-to-water system, even in Europe, is a little bit more complicated. And for someone, the type of folks that are drawn to doing this work are the types of folks that aren't just looking to kind of do the quick and dirty and easy swap of some piece of equipment. It does require to do it well and to make sure that someone is still comfortable. It does require some proper design at the beginning, and then proper design and thought in terms of the equipment. There are a few more pieces of equipment that are needed to consider and design and pick and install. So it can take a little bit longer then as a result. The main difference as far as kind of design and comfort considerations, the water temperature from an air-to-water heat pump is typically around 40 degrees Celsius, whereas the water temperature from a gas boiler is typically around 70 to 80 degrees. So that may not matter if your home has, when it was built like 100, 150 years ago, it was uninsulated and leaky as a sieve. And if over time people have done renovations and added insulation and made it less leaky, then you might not need 70, 80 degrees water going through those radiators. You might be fine with 40 degrees because your house isn't going to lose heat as fast. But proper design is important to make sure that you're still going to be comfortable in each kind of corner of your room. And sometimes it's possible that your house is going to be fine with that lower water temperature and the radiators. But in other cases, just the simple thought of adding like one or two radiators or adding one or two sources of kind of complementary heat can help make sure that you stay comfortable. So I'm not saying it's a no-go, because you will hear from many contractors that they can't do an air-to-water heat pump with cast iron radiators. And that is a myth. That is not true. It is definitely possible. There are people on this webinar who have cast iron radiators and air-to-water heat pumps. It's just that potentially you may need to add a few radiators just in case. There are other options too. Operating costs, I guess I'm complimenting what I think Jake put in the chat, but yeah, folks that I've worked with are finding it's often around the same, give or take. Some larger savings come a few $100 anyway if you can cancel your Enbridge account altogether and then save that $25 or so that's not that you pay to Enbridge, regardless of how many cubic meters of gas you consume. Comfort. So this is a big one. I would say most folks, again, as long as it's properly designed, are finding that it's providing better comfort in their home. So heat pumps tend, because the water temperature is a little lower, heat pumps tend to run kind of more steadily. I sort of liken like a gas boiler is similar to kind of like a go-kart. It's like either going or not. It's jerky and jolty, and it's not a smooth ride, that's for sure. Whereas a heat pump is like driving a car, let's say like an electric car. And so it's you can ramp up, you can ramp down, and that provides a more smooth, steady, and comfortable heat in your house. Noise is also, sometimes a consideration. And so indoors tends to be sort of similar to a gas boiler. Outdoor, you have a new piece of equipment outdoors that, does make noise in the winter when most people aren't outside. But I would say, less noise than most ACs if you're kind of comparing the noise there. So that's air to water heat pumps. I've got, I think, yeah, a photo, and this is Bruce. He's actually on the webinar, so thanks, Bruce, for sharing your. Should have actually put who lives in Riverdale, and here's him under his air to water heat pump. I really like, Bruce, that you put this little like roof over your heat pump as well to kind of protect it from snow. And you can see this is not a very large heat pump. It's got one fan. Sometimes you might have seen heat pumps that are about twice as tall. They have kind of two fans, like it's one unit, but two fans on top of each other, like stacked together. And that's just because Bruce has done an incredible job with, this is a double brick home, but with insulating and air sealing his home, so that his home did not need a large boiler or a large heat pump rather to heat. Indoors, and this is Paul Devset, who's also on this webinar. Thanks, Paul. Photo credit to you. Indoors, I just wanted to show you a little bit. It looks very similar to what your mechanical room will look like. You know, like your copper or PEX pipe on the wall with the pumps on the wall, and then a small little buffer tank. Paul has two larger tanks, one for his solar hot water as well. So you will often need about the same footprint indoors, because you will need like a holding tank for the hot water that's heated by the air to water heat pump. Kind of, if you think about it, acts a bit like a thermal battery. And then you'll still need something for your domestic hot water, whether it can be preheated by the air to water and then boosted, or just a separate tank. You will often need a separate system. So that's air to water. There'll be time, I guess, at the end, Nathan, for questions, or do you want me to pause as we go? How do you?
We'll do questions at the end.
Okay, great. So at the beginning, I mentioned the two main options. I said all electric and then hybrid. So this is the hybrid option where, you've decided for whatever reason that air to water is not for you. The costs are a little bit higher. And I would say the main downside is that you don't end up with cooling. So unlike air to air heat pumps, where if you have ductwork, you can put in one piece of equipment, it can do your heating and cooling. An air to water heat pump, if you're using your radiators, is not recommended anyway. In theory, it's possible to extract heat from inside and pump it outside, but that temperature of the water is going to be cold enough that you're going to get moisture on the radiators, and maybe even on your like your water pipes behind the walls and whatnot, and that could moisture in spots you don't want it is always a bad thing. So not recommended. There are some new homes now that are getting designed with air to water heat pumps, and that are have something similar that looks similar to a radiator, but it's called a fan coil that can do cooling as well. So if you're in the position of you're on this webinar and you're building a new house, I haven't really spoken to that, but that would be an option to incorporate cooling. But if you're looking to retrofit your existing home, cooling with an air to water heat pump is not recommended, and for the moisture issues, unless, as Paul says, unless you want puddles on your floor. So ductless heat pumps are a great option if you want cooling or need cooling maybe, and want to sort of reduce your gas. Usually you can go kind of, like I was saying, around -5, -6, depends on exactly the size of your house and how many ductless heat pumps you put in and where you put them. But it'll take you pretty reasonably far through the spring and the fall, and then into some of the winter. And the cost can range depending on how many ductless heat pumps you get and the brand. But you're looking between $15,000 to $25,000. I've seen folks actually spend $30,000 when they get a ton of ductless heat pumps. Ductless heat pumps have been around the longest out of all the sort of the categories of heat pumps, because we've had homes with radiators that need cooling, and this has become an option over time. And a lot of folks that have old ductless heat pumps will have the old non-cold climate ones, so they're not going to be very efficient. Temperature starts to drop below zero, and often quite costly to heat with. But these days, with good cold climate heat pumps, they are a great option if you want some cooling and want to reduce your heating. So like I said, they're going to provide you some air conditioning, about half your gas consumption. It is difficult to get entirely off gas, so you could, but it really depends on sort of the size of your house and the amount of insulation and leakiness or not lack of leakiness in your house. If it's just a fairly small house and it's open concept, then and it's been reasonably well insulated, then one ductless heat pump could keep all the corners of your house comfortable, like on a single floor. But if we're talking about older, grand, beautiful double brick homes that aren't well insulated and have many different rooms, then which is often the case in the homes that I've worked with anyway, that have hydronic heating, then barring plastering a bunch of ductless heat pumps on every floor, it's going to be really hard to get entirely off gas. I was just in a home last week that I think, Michelle, you're on this webinar, and we worked together with this homeowner who has an older gas boiler, and they really wanted to get all the way off gas, but ended up with they have a 3-story home, and sort of the top story is like a kind of a half story, and they put one heat pump on each floor, and are finding already that like on the main floor anyway, they put the heat pump kind of in the kitchen where they tend to spend a lot of time, and they're already finding that the front entrance is quite chilly. So they would add another 1 or 2 if they wanted to get entirely off gas and keep that floor comfortable for sure. The other consideration with heat pumps is you don't tend to see the ductless heat pumps in a bathroom because those spaces are so small, and you don't end up needing a ton of heating or cooling. And so if you're trying to use a heat pump both for heating and cooling, it may actually end up being oversized in cooling in really small rooms. And an oversized heat pump for cooling just means it's not going to do a very good job cooling. It's going to turn on. It's kind of going to be like a go-kart. It's going to turn on really quickly, try and hit that temperature that you've got set on the thermostat, and then turn off. And it's not going to stay on long enough to reduce the humidity in the air. And those of us who live in Toronto know that our summers are very humid. So there's a lot of considerations when it comes to sort of how many and where you want those ductless heat pumps. Operating costs tend to be around the same as well. And comfort, I have found, in fact, this house that I was in last week, they said specifically that their house was often very cold, right around 4 or 5 degrees. It just ended up being very cold, and they didn't understand it. And then they got these heat pumps, and they're finding it's so much more comfortable, these ductless heat pumps. And it's because their gas boiler is much too large for what their house needs. So their gas boiler is like the go-kart. It's turning on and blasting out that heat through the radiators, but not staying on long enough to let that heat really adequately radiate through the house, especially when it's not that cold outside. So their ductless heat pumps have done a great job of keeping them comfortable this fall. Noise, I would suggest, if you are sensitive to noise, that Mitsubishi Electric, which is a lot more expensive than other brands, is worth the extra cost. Their indoor units, and you can look up the specs as well, their indoor and outdoor units are a lot quieter than a lot of other brands. So this is just a picture of, hopefully I haven't rambled, ductless heat pumps without folks kind of having some idea what they look like, but this is a picture of one above a bedroom in a house that I didn't work in them. They were one of the first that I met that got heat pumps before heat pumps were cool. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, as I've talked about the all electric and the hybrid system, would be, and I guess I've touched on this already, would be, if changing your mechanicals isn't something that's within scope right now, I would still encourage you to think about what you can do to reduce your fossil fuel consumption. And that would involve making your house more insulated and more airtight. I should have included the reference here. This is a quote from Bruce, actually. So this is something that he recommended. I hope this was Bruce. Might have been Chris, actually. Sorry, guys. But basically speaking to the importance of thinking about reducing your air leakage and adding insulation, and that has helped. In this case, that has helped the homeowner as far as improving comfort in their home. And contrary would be another home, another part of their house that does not have any insulation and is quite uncomfortable. So, like I said, if you look at the cost and it's out of scope and you still want to do what you can, I would start with reducing your air leakage. It's often the top source of heat loss in old Toronto homes anyway. Usually about 50, 60, even 70% of a home's heat loss is through air leakage. And you'd be surprised what can be done with a little bit of caulking and some elbow grease as well. As far as what is available right now, so I'm going from like kind of probably most interesting to least interesting. There's a provincial program, the Home Renovation Savings Program that Enbridge is offering, and there are rebates for heat pumps, $1,000 to $2,000 for ductless and ducted heat pumps. You do not need an audit. HVAC contractors apply. To be eligible, you have to have one ductless heat pump on each floor, so including the basement, which might seem annoying if you are thinking about doing ductless heat pumps more for cooling, because you don't really need a heat pump in the basement for cooling. But if you're wanting to reduce your gas consumption, putting a heat pump in the basement will help, because warm air is more buoyant, it rises. And so we actually need more heat in the basement than we do on the top floor. So you're going to use that ductless heat pump in the spring and the fall, and not in the summer, but in the spring and the fall. And that'll help you get reduce the amount of time that you're using your gas boiler. There are small rebates for insulation, windows, doors, heat pump, water tanks. So basically everything else that you could think of that might reduce your home's energy consumption. Those are all bundled into like another bucket of this same home renovation savings program. You do need an energy audit. Right now, they've extended the program until the end of May, but I've heard that it'll likely be extended beyond that. And typically, you might be sitting there saying, well, like, why is Enbridge offering these programs? They do so reluctantly. They're mandated by the Ontario Energy Board to use ratepayer funds to help incent folks to reduce their gas consumption. So there tends to often be a program offered by Enbridge, and it has different names and slightly different rules, but they tend to be a little bit more consistent than other rebate programs, at least, although they're not often designed to be large enough to actually motivate and incent folks to do the work. But if you are going to be doing the work, it's worth knowing about them and taking advantage of them. As far as financing goes, the City of Toronto offers a loan program. It's a low interest loan. There's a 2% administration fee, and you can look up online, sort of compare the interest rates, but it tends to be a little bit lower than a home equity line of credit. You also need an audit to access that program, as well as part of the criteria. Federally, what can I say? Disappointing, and I wouldn't hold my breath. All right. On that note, I'm going to pass it back to you, Nathan.
Cool. Thanks for getting into the weeds. It's much appreciated. I hadn't appreciated that point about bathrooms not typically having ductless heads. That was interesting for me. And similarly, my apartment doesn't have radiators in the bathroom, so that becomes a pretty chilly room for us. Yeah. Cool. So I'm happy to continue with our presentation here, and we'll be getting into more of the strikeouts and home runs, these projects that went really well and the projects that didn't go so well. And we have words of advice from the homeowners that have done both. This segment was inspired by the Blue Jays run to the World Series for sure, but I think it captures a lot of good information, so I thought we'd keep running with it there. Sweet. I'm going to dive into our model a bit more after the case studies, but at the highest level, the Toronto Home Energy Network, we're a nonprofit. We're not here to sell you anything, and we want you to make the right choice for your home, for your values, for your budget, for your family, what you're interested in. That's what we're here to do, and we want to get you the right resources and talking to the right people at the right time for that project. Okay, so starting with the home runs, the mantra you can keep in mind while I'm describing this project is helping hands. And to contextualize that a little bit more, we're going to introduce Harvey and Susan, who got the heat pump in spring of this year. I'll give some background on their project in just a second. But I love this quote, like, we went in knowing nothing. We just were climate motivated, and our energy advisor, who was Sarah, uh, really held our hands, and it was really great. And the second part of the quotation that I want to draw your attention to is we've never had it so good here, and we've been in this house for 30 years. That's just building on more of what Sarah was saying with the comfort benefits of installing heat pumps. So I'm going to dive into what their actual project is with that sort of high level context on who Harvey and Susan are. So their home is a 1949 detached home in York Center, so just north of the 401 there. And they were historically reliant on radiators connected to a gas boiler to provide all of their heating. And they had a cantankerous old AC to provide them cooling in the summer. And they wanted a big energy efficiency upgrade on their home. That was their motivation for starting to look into this project. And they started their research in 2024 and had their heat pumps go in this spring. So their project was they added two ductless cold climate heat pumps. So that was just what Sarah was talking about in the second segment there, as well as some solar panels. And the twist with their project, and why I wanted to bring it up as a case study, is they kept their radiators as backup heat as well. So let's dive into those three wins and what I think we can take away if we're interested in getting a heat pump in our own homes as well. So first, they took their time, explored their options with those helping hands with them as well. So they called up Sarah, or you can call up another energy advisor, or we call them retrofit advisors as well. And this is a much less stressful option than finding yourself in the middle of January with a dead furnace, thinking, oh, I'm interested in heat pumps, but I kind of procrastinated doing my research and planning. Can we get it done? I'm trying to get all these space heaters in my apartment in the meantime. My spouse is pissed. Much nicer to plan and think about your options ahead of time there. So I think that's one thing that Harvey and Susan did a really good job of. They also had their heat load calculation. If that's a new term for you, don't worry. I'm going to define it in the next slide as well. But it's just this emphasis on doing the measurements ahead of time. So we have this clear understanding of how much heat is actually needed to keep you cozy in the winter. So they had this calculation done so they could install the right heat pumps at the right size for their home so they could go into this first winter with a lot of confidence that they're going to work out for them. And they kept their radiators as backup heating just in case. So as we mentioned, they got the cold climate ductless heat pumps. So if it ever gets down to that level where the cold climate heat pumps can't keep up, and we saw some questions about this in the chat, and so we'll get into that in the Q&A. The radiators are there to flip on and give them some backup heating as well. So for them, this was a kind of a nice middle ground. They didn't get all the way off gas, but in these first couple winters, they're going to see how they feel with their home comfort with the new heat pumps. And the hope is that in a year or two, when they're feeling very confident, they'll be able to open up this file again and totally disconnect their gas. So in this way, they've got heat pumps. They didn't have to rip out their old radiators. They're still there in the background, but they're going to be using significantly less gas this winter than they have in the past. So just diving in again, the takeaway from this slide as I define heat load is it's a really good thing to ask about when you're going into this project to get a heat pump in your home. Your heat load's just a number that tells you how much energy it takes to heat your home. It takes a lot of different things into consideration, like how drafty your home is, how much sun it gets, your insulation. So it's a bit of extra work to get this done, which is why sometimes HVAC installers might skip this process and do things like rule of thumb, saying, hey, square footage is enough. I can make a good enough guess on this. We don't recommend going that route. Doing a little bit of extra heat load calculations, which energy advisors are there to help you do, will give you a lot of confidence in your heat pump installation. Of course, that calculation, it takes a little bit of technical training, so energy advisors there, and we hear from them that the energy bills are the best way to help discover this heat load. This isn't modeling or projections about what it might be. It's you used this much gas to heat your home last year. We can do calculations based on your actual usage in your home. So we really recommend retrofit advisors and energy advisors being brought in early on the process so you can get that heat load calculation figured out before you start thinking about models, before you're looking at prices. This is a good way to start. So ask about heat load is definitely the takeaway from this section. So I'll dive into the strikeouts, and the mantra that I want you to kind of take in here is trust but verify. And to contextualize that, we're going to talk a little bit about Margaret, who's in Seton Village. She installed a hydronic heat pump. So she went air to water. She wanted to totally get off gas. That was her motivation. And it was actually in her second winter. She did an entire winter on a hydronic heat pump and had no problems at all. When she discovered that it hadn't been set up properly. On a particularly cold January night, her heat and power suddenly went out. The breaker for her heat pump was blown out. So this is exactly the sort of stressful situation that we bring up in a webinar now, not to scare you, but to say, hey, what can we learn from Margaret's situation? What did she tell us that she would do differently next time? What are her words of advice on this? So you don't find yourself in this situation, cold, calling up contractors, trying to get emergency work done on your home when it's cold out. So a little bit more context on Margaret's project. She has a 1907 semi-detached home in Harvard Village, so one of those century homes there. She's climate motivated, so she's been making updates, insulation and solar to her home since 2007. So definitely innovator, forward-looking in this space. And the heat pumps were one of the more recent projects that she brought into her place. As we mentioned, wanted to get off gas completely, but a missed wire in the hookup meant the backup heat from the electric water heater was never connected. So when it got really cold, the heat pump had to work too hard. The system was designed in a way where a backup heat was meant to click in at this time, but it didn't end up happening that way. And so there was a power surge as the heat pump sped up to try to meet that demand, and it actually damaged the breaker and some of the components of the heat pump as well. So a lot of stress, a lot of frustration. Fortunately, the parts were under warranty. She was able to get some of that replaced, installed a surge protector. But we do definitely owe a debt to Margaret for being a bit of an early adopter in this space and figuring out some of the things that we can do differently. So contextualizing that mantra of that trust but verify. If you're going to go the hydronic heat pump, the air to water route, she definitely recommends having the installer show you all the components, how things hook up, how they work. Basically, what I take away from that is saying, again, this is still on the front edge of things in Toronto, so you have to be a little bit more of an expert in your system if you want to go the hydronic route. But for some people, it's going to be very exciting, and it's just a conversation to have with your installer to make sure that there's good information traveling both ways as things are getting installed. The second thing she mentioned is monitor the way the appliance is installed and ask for a checklist from the installer. She sent us one, which we'll share in the handout with you with the recording tomorrow as well. But that's really where this trust but verify conversation comes in. It can feel a little bit nerve-wracking to be involved in your contractor's work. They're an expert, but hopefully they have good bedside manner and they're willing and excited to embrace your interest in what's going on in your own home there. So this isn't meant to, create an adversarial relationship between you and your installer, but there's things on the checklist like, making sure the disposal of old equipment is scheduled. Just these little things that might get missed when we're focused on the bigger picture. And the last thing she said on a bit of a lighter note is ask about a phone app to track your systems in real time. This is getting into that smart thermostat conversation. Those have been on the market for a long time. And so you get a little bit more control and insight into how your system's working. And that's kind of a fun thing to have that control and understanding of what's going on there. So we have Margaret's 3 pieces of advice there. And a lot of this boils down to the contractor that you're using. So we have a couple ways where you can find trustworthy contractors for your project. We have case studies, which Jake has been posting in the chat, and you can flip between the different case studies and you'll see project budgets as well as the installers that people were using. In Margaret's case, she didn't recommend the installer that she used, so you won't see her installer there. But most other people are very happy with their projects and willing to recommend contractors there. If you're going the hydronic route, you just want to make sure you're upfront about that and understand their experience. The other way is retrofit advisors or energy advisors like Sarah have a network of contractors that they've worked with and will be able to recommend people to you. The Home Retrofit Forum is a really excellent Facebook group. People are very attentive and answering questions very quickly, and you can post about your project there. Or alternatively, you can look into the chat and see historically, if you just look up like contractor or something like that, you can see who other people are recommending. But it's always great to just introduce your project and some of the roadblocks, and people are very willing to help out there. And the last of the four, there's certified installer databases. That just means that contractors have done a little bit of extra work to get vetted to appear on these directories like Toronto Clean Services Directory and the Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Institute of Canada's Heat Pump Champion Advocate Directory, which is a mouthful, but it's a helpful resource. So we'll have links for those in the chats and sending them out tomorrow as well. Okay, so we're going to transition just to close up the webinar before we move into the Q&A with just a couple words about our community support model. And I'll prompt Jake here to throw up our final poll, which is just asking people about your next steps and what kind of support you'd be interested in going forward. And our model is just based on neighbors giving neighbors honest advice. People aren't trying to sell you when you're talking to your neighbors. And we facilitate those neighbor exchanges through things like heat pump parties where you're demonstrating the technology, or energy audit parties where Sarah or another energy advisor comes around and sets up the blower door, comes with thermal cameras, and show you exactly where those drafts are sucking all the heat out of your home and how to fix it. I went to one last week, and it's honestly fun. It's got all the energy of a science experiment with like going with the thermal cameras, and it's like, and you really want to fix it when you see drafts through the thermal camera. It just creates that energy. So I really love that. So we want in-person and digital support for people that want heat pumps here. And that in-person support, we're expanding our partner communities. This is just groups we work with across the city to facilitate these parties and spread out resources and education. So we have partner communities in Parkdale High Park, Seton Village, and the Pocket Change project in the east, and the Greener Homes Bedford Park in the north, and Harvard Village Net Zero in the center. And we're always expanding that. And also, we want to be in places of work or faith groups. These are also great opportunities to spread information and have the conversation about heat pumps there. So on our website as well, you'll see under communities, we have a partner communities directory where you can access all of these pages and get in contact with them if you find that they're in your neighborhood. I know there's a couple of people from Seton Village joining, so that's a great project there. So I mentioned the Home Retrofit Forum. This is just another plug to go and join that and introduce yourself and your project there. And the last thing I'll say before I close up here is we've just released Your First Heat Pump Guidebook, which is a digital resource for especially people who are brand new to this heat pump conversation, who didn't really think of it as an option before, but want to understand what needs to happen to their homes, what works well in certain kinds of homes than others, what rebates are available, what are the costs, what are the speed bumps. We've put it all together here in this one document, and we'll link that in the chat for the download, and we'll send it in the handout tomorrow. And we're updating this, but a good way to keep up with our work as well is joining our fun and infrequent newsletter, where we're sharing other events and electrification updates there. So I'll finish by plugging that and thanking our funders. Toronto Hydro is one of our funders, and the Toronto Atmospheric Fund is one of our funders, thanking our speakers, and thanking all of you. We were excited about the energy and the questions that people were having about this. So we're actually going to end the recording section now and move into the question and answer phase. So if you've been holding on to any questions, this is a good time to get those out, as I'll move into that section now.